So welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Amita Kutner. I am just honored to be able to be somewhat host and moderator, at least later for the Q&A tonight, for Dr. Devyani Singh and Dr. David Suzuki. And I think maybe they just chose me because I also have a PhD, but my PhD not so relevant for tonight. I'll also start by saying that where I am and the writing of Vancouver Quadra is on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, and that in this particular time, and I believe as always, those of us who are settlers really need to step up to the plate and do some of the very important work and commit to returning these lands and using the benefits that we have gained by settling here to seek justice. Tonight, we'll be hearing from both our lovely people, and then there will be a Q&A that I'll be moderating. So without further ado, we'll get to the program. And I now have to introduce Dr. David Suzuki. And I've spent the last few days trying to figure out how to do this. And what am I going to say? How do I encapsulate this? And so I've flat given up because I cannot possibly condense the, grand person that he is into a few moments of description. So at least I offer you my personal respect and welcome you to our event, and looking very much forward to hearing this discussion tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to have this opportunity to give my full support to Devyani Singh for Member of Parliament in Vancouver Quadra. In fact, I'm on Quadra Island, the traditional unceded territory of the Wee-Way-Kay Nation, who cared for these lands and waters for thousands of years, a genuine model of sustainability. If you watched the debate last night, you would certainly not have got the impression that climate change is an emergency. I mean, it was treated as just another political issue. I think the media probably have a lot to blame for that. As well as the candidates that were on. But I was disappointed at how little time was actually spent on the issue. At least the conservatives are no longer ignoring it or denying it, but everyone is treating it still as a political football. And as an elder, I think it's my role to remind you of the past. The discovery that certain gases reflect heat was made in the early 1800s. And in 1896, the Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius suggested as humanity burned fossil fuels such as coal, adding carbon dioxide to the Earth's atmosphere, the planet's average temperature would rise. So, that's over a century ago that scientists were on this. By the 1950s, the science of global warming was sufficiently robust that the National Academy of Sciences in the United States commissioned a study of global warming. Lyndon Johnson, who was the United States president in the early 60s, raised global warming as an issue of concern. And in 1965, Frank Icahn, the CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, that's the American counterpart to CAP, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, warned that burning fossil fuels would warm the planet possibly beyond human ability to adapt by the year 2000. That's the president of the organization overseeing all of the petroleum producers. By the late 60s, President Jimmy Carter turned down the thermostat, put on a sweater, and installed solar panels on the White House, only to have them ripped out by Ronald Reagan while the fossil fuel industry began to spend billions denying the threat of global warming. In 1988, a very important meeting gathered in Toronto. It attracted members of over 40 governments, including 26 cabinet members, joined by Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, Norwegian PM Gro Harlem Brundtland, Ambassador to the United Nations Stephen Lewis, and climatologist James Hansen. Not a bad lineup for the 300 delegates that were there. They were so alarmed by the science that the press release said global warming represents a threat second only to all-out global nuclear war, that we were performing a dangerous experiment with the atmosphere, and called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 15 years. That was it. The science was in, the politicians were there, everyone heard it. If we had taken that target seriously, we wouldn't have the crisis we have now. Study after study in Sweden, Canada, the United States, Australia showed that a 20% reduction in 15 years was achievable, and if done, would yield a net savings in the hundreds of billions of dollars. I did my first program on global warming in 1989. And we said at that time in the nature of things, we have to act now. But it was a slow motion catastrophe. I actually thought, oh, we've got decades to get off fossil fuels. In 1989, I also did a 5-part radio series called It's a Matter of Survival. And it resulted in 16,000 letters. This is before email. And most of them said, you scared the hell out of me. I believe it, but what can I do? And that led me to start the David Suzuki Foundation in 1990. But why did no government in the world take the warning seriously? And I think it was politics and economics. The fossil fuel industry fought against any restriction and spent billions in a campaign of deception. Oh, it's a theory. There's no proof. It's not real. It's a natural process. Humans aren't involved, so on. But if he had taken the crisis seriously, Brian Mulroney would have had to spend tens of billions up front, right off the bat. And he would take a shit kicking for that, only to have someone else 15 years later take credit for achieving the target and saving lives and money. So it made no political sense for Mulroney to do it. In 1992, more than 1,400 senior scientists from 71 nations, including over half of all living Nobel Prize winners, signed World Scientists Warning to Humanity, in which they suggested in one or a few decades, if humanity did not change directions, that humanity might find the planet unlivable. At the Earth Summit in Rio, the largest gathering of heads of state in human history, they were presented with a target of stabilizing 1990 levels of emissions by the year 2000. Canada signed, but did nothing. Remember Stephen Harper? For 9.5 years, the ultimate climate denier actively suppressed discussion about climate change because taking it seriously was crazy economics. And his stooge, Jason Kenney, continues to promote that today, because in their minds, the economy comes before the atmosphere that gives us air to breathe, that gives us weather, climate, and the seasons. Harper pulled Canada out of the Kyoto Protocol, the only signatory country to do so, because of course, all while he was prime minister, our emissions continued to climb. But in 2015, Harper was booted. Justin Trudeau announced Canada is back, signed the Paris Agreement, and said we should try to keep temperature rise above pre-industrial levels, closer to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. And we all cheered. Finally, someone who took the science seriously and announced support for a tough target. Then 2.5 years later, Mr. Trudeau bought a pipeline. And that is now behind schedule and has ballooned in costs by billions of dollars. And he bought it for us on the absurd excuse that we must triple tar sands production for the taxes that we need to reduce our emissions. That's like saying, yes, smoking causes cancer, so we must sell more cigarettes for the tax revenue to find a cure for lung cancer. That is not a solution. It's an absurd argument. The only time I have ever voted for a party that won the election was 2015, when I voted strategically for Joyce Murray to keep Stephen Harper from another win. Now, I like Joyce. She's smart. She understands the crisis that climate change represents, but all members of the Liberal Party are whipped. That means they must support the government when it comes to votes. So she supports the pipeline, and it's the rationale that Trudeau has provided. In October 2018, the IPCC released a special report that said a rise above 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels by 2100 will be catastrophic for humanity. We're aiming towards a 3-degree rise at least right now. And they called for a 45% reduction in emissions by 2030 and 100% by 2050. The next day, marijuana became legal in Canada and pushed all discussion of climate change out of the media. In May of 2019, the United Nations released a terrifying report on biodiversity and ecosystem services that indicated human activity has driven countless species of plants and animals already into extinction and threatens another 1 million species. The next day, Harry and Meghan had a baby, and that's all that was covered for the next week. Justin Trudeau must be denied a majority government, or he will continue as he has to support the fossil fuel industry and water down his effort to reduce emissions with promises. Net zero by 2050. How many times did he say that last night during the debate? Does he think voters are that stupid? Net zero by 2050 is a political statement. It is meaningless without enforced reductions starting immediately. There will be at least 7 elections between now and 2050, probably more like 9 or 10. And you know, every new government acts as if what the old government did was crap, throws it out, and starts all over again. And, you know, Trudeau most certainly will not be in office by 2050, nor will any current member of parliament. So who will be responsible when we fail to meet the target? Who can we throw in jail or fine? No one. But we can be sure the planet will be in far worse shape than it is now. Net zero by 2050 is a classic political statement that means nothing. Climate change is not a political issue. It is an existential crisis that threatens dire effects on our children and future generations. It is an emergency. When we declared COVID-19 an emergency, did anyone say, oh my God, where are you going to get the money to pay for that? Money suddenly appeared in the billions. We didn't even know it existed. We don't need an excuse for doing the right thing when we are in an emergency. We need climate champions in every party who are willing to make climate change their overriding issue and will defy their whips to vote on principle. Now, the Green Party is the only one that does not whip its members, but I am supporting candidates in any party who I have faith in to support the right initiatives. We need people in Parliament who understand and take science seriously. And Devyani Singh's education and training make her highly qualified to pursue strong measures to reduce the threat of climate change. But she's also got a track record of working to help workers who will be affected by those changes to transition to the new energy future. Please support Devyani. Tell everyone you know to support Devyani for the sake of our children and grandchildren. We need her in office. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Could not agree more. And I really appreciate hearing the political backgrounder on how we got to this point, because I think it is really important to keep that in mind. And what it got me thinking about was that political cycle. Who will be there in 2050 when everybody's incentivized for 4 years of showmanship? You really don't get anywhere, and yet here we are. And so I think to introduce Dr. Devyani Singh now, the amazing opportunity I think that we have to actually elect somebody who will bring relevant expertise to the House, who as an individual would be able to shape policy going forward by telling the truth, by bringing these solutions forward. And it brings to mind something that I've been feeling for the last few days as I've watched Dr. Singh debate. And it's that I've seen over and over again her credibility questioned as an expert on climate. And it frustrates me because it is that political opportunism that would dare to try to silence a scientist stepping up in this greatest time of need. And I think that Devyani herself will be able to show now exactly why it is that having her would make such a big difference. So here she is.
Thank you, Dr. Suzuki, and thank you, Amita, for that wonderful introduction. And as you said, it's really great to get that primer as to how politics has got us here today. And so I want to start out by thanking everyone for joining us wherever you are. Not everyone is in Quadra. And, you know, I know we did a land acknowledgement, but I really want to say why land acknowledgement means so much to me. I'm on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And when I think about policy and climate, I aim to incorporate Indigenous stewardship and respect for Indigenous governance in everything that I do. And it is important to recognize the past and ongoing genocide of Indigenous people. To me, it is particularly important because I am a settler who has come from a previously colonized nation. So I'm genuinely committed to truth, reconciliation, justice, and land back. And again, I want to acknowledge Dr. David Suzuki for being here. And, you know, I've been a fan all my life, and I have, you know, even as a climate scientist, so it means a lot for me that you are here. And few people have done as much work or as much good for climate as you have. And you know, it is such an honor to get to speak here, be endorsed by you as a candidate. And I hope that the work I do invokes and continues your legacy. So I thank you again. I think most of you know me, but for those who do not, I'll give you a quick, brief introduction. So I grew up in the Indian Himalayas, and even back in the 80s and 90s, I could see the impacts of climate change on these ecosystems that I loved. Increased wildfires, species were going extinct, there was increased glacial melt. And this is what inspired me to do something. However, I think because I only had limited options to be doctor, engineer, or business, I ended up going and doing an MBA in finance and working in corporate America. Like I say, I realized one day that everything I was doing working in this financial industry was going against my own ethics and values. And that is when I took a leap of faith and I quit. I was done selling my soul, and I went back and I did a second master's in environmental science. And that's when I found my roots again. And that's what brought me actually to Vancouver, to Quadra, for my PhD at the UBC Faculty of Forestry, where I started focusing on climate and energy policy. While doing my PhD, and since then as a postdoc, I have worked on getting clean cooking access to millions of households in the global south. I have worked with the Nuhawk Nation in the Great Bear Rainforest on sustainable forestry initiatives. I've worked in Alberta on oil and gas emissions and methane emissions reduction. I have worked on how do we make a just transition to a greener future feasible. And while looking at the workers and what is it that the workers need. And most recently, I am working on creating a handbook for nature-based climate solutions, identifying all the issues that exist and how can we solve them. And all these experiences have shaped who I am today and my convictions about political action. And so why am I running with the Green Party? It is one, as Dr. Suzuki said, it is, I am not whipped. And I truly care about climate. As a climate scientist who had been working on policy relevant science, I reached out to all parties during the last decade, well, more like the last 5 years. I reached out to all of them and nobody replied but the Green Party. And that's what made me realize that they really did care about science and evidence. And time again, we see that, that government has been ignoring science. And that's this frustration, this anger in me, because I'm terrified about our future. And I am terrified about where we are headed if we don't take this action. It's what brought me into politics in October. When Horgan called the snap election, I realized I just could not sit back anymore. And this is why I'm here. I'm here because if politicians won't listen to science, I will bring the science to them. And I hope I can really, fight for many. So let me say, I got into politics because of climate science, but there is a lot more that is wrong with our system. We need to make sure as we look in taking climate action that it is centered in justice and equity. And that every policy decision going forward that is made in Parliament should be made with a climate lens to it. And then every policy that has a climate lens, which is every policy, should be centered in justice and equity. Because where we are today, the systems are not working for everybody. They are only working for a few. So that's just a bit about me, and I can talk more about like what I believe in, what I plan to bring, but I think I want to make it more of a discussion. So if you feel that you want me to talk more about my plans for when I come in Parliament, or we can just open that up to Q&A and we can talk about it then. So what do you think, Dr. Amita Kutner?
Well, lovely introduction. I think we have a bunch of really interesting questions here for both of you. So it would be, I think there will be an opportunity. I think while you're answering them, if you would like to add in kind of like how this is incentivizing you to show up right now or everything, that's also good. And when the background that you've spent so many years building, grad school life and all that like comes into play, it's a great opportunity to speak it. But we do have some great questions here. And I'll just remind everybody now that it's also a good time to put in questions if you're coming up with them. And even as we go along, we'll have about half an hour for questions and answers. And yeah, so be good to welcome Dr. Suzuki back. And I guess I believe these questions are in fact for both of you, or some of them are for one of you, but I assume the rest are for both of you. So I'm just going to start at the top and then feel free to discuss. And when you're done, I will get on to the next one. So the first question is about carbon removal technology, like pumping it into the ground. How safe is it? Who pays for it? And where do the political parties, including the Green Party, stand on this technology?
Dr. Suzuki, do you want to begin or should I start?
Sure, I'm happy to begin because I feel that all of the delay that's been going on, and we really have to put our finger on the fossil fuel industry itself, that is known that climate change is real, is being caused by the burning of fossil fuels since the 1960s. Mm-hmm. We know for a fact Exxon's own scientists were warning about it in the 1960s. And they have spent billions, rather than looking at an energy transition, they've spent it on a denial campaign that has worked. And so what I'm terrified of is that they pushed and pushed and pushed and kept us from doing the things that needed to be done, so that now we've got this very narrow window of making real change. And the only thing left is going to be geoengineering. They're going to say, well, it's too late. We don't have the technology. We've got to invent the technology. And one of the ways is to capture the carbon and stick it in the ground. First of all, it's crazy to do that when we haven't even reduced or eliminated our emissions. The ability to capture carbon is not 100%, so it continues to put stuff out. But it's based on the fact that the industry found that when an oil well is running out, if they pump carbon dioxide under pressure into the ground, they can extrude more oil. So they were using carbon dioxide simply as a way of getting more product out, but the carbon dioxide never came back. So they went, oh, wow, that's great. We'll just pump all the carbon dioxide under. Wait a minute now. What do we know about what's underground? You know, we used to think that life ended at bedrock. You hit bedrock and there's nothing under it. But every time people were drilling deeper and deeper, they kept getting bacterial contamination, and they thought it was just bits that were contaminated above ground, then shoved on. But when they started to look at them, these bacteria were like nothing they'd ever seen above ground. Now we know that you can get bacteria up to 7 kilometers underground. And if you know, life on the surface of the planet, it's a very thin layer, right? But underground, it goes up to 7 kilometers deep. And Steve Gould, many years ago, said, if that's the case, if there's life up to 7 meters, even though it's not as dense as it is above ground, he calculated there's more weight of living protoplasm underground than there is above it. We know nothing about them. When you look at the DNA of these bacteria, it's like finding dinosaurs on the planet. They're so different from anything we know. They have to invent new phyla, which is a classification thing just below animals and plants. I mean, we don't know anything about them. What's their role in energy movement from the center up to the top, or water movement, or flow of, we know nothing about them. So I was giving a lecture in Princeton a few years ago, and Sturla Onstad, who's one of the leading scientists on these underground microorganisms, I said, Sturla, they're going to pump billions of tons of carbon dioxide in the ground. What do you think that'll do to the bacteria? And his answer was, I have no idea, but the methanogens will love it. I said, what's that? They're bacteria that take carbon dioxide, convert it into methane, which is 80 times more potent than greenhouse gas. Like, what the hell? We are crazy. We just think out of sight, out of mind. Pump it into the ground, dump it in the ocean. We know that we know so little. When we go for a big technological solution, there are all kinds of unanticipated consequences. We learned that with DDT. We learned that with, you know, atomic bombs are dropped on Japan. We didn't even know there was a thing called radioactive fallout. CFCs were used by the hundreds of thousands of pounds. Only later we discover its effect on ozone layer. We think we're going to take over the atmosphere and engineer the atmosphere. This is crazy. The best absorbent of carbon dioxide is still nature, and we're cutting it down as fast as we can go. Sorry.
Thank you for that. That is way better than I could have ever put it. But it is true, these are unproven technologies, and we do not know what the impacts will be. As I, you know, like I said, you gave all the details why that is so. And there's another side to this that bothers me. We have subsidized fossil fuels for so long that I'm pretty sure if we do it, it'll come onto the public cost, while fossil fuel industry is being given the go ahead to pump more. When you look at the Liberal plan for climate change and net zero, they rely heavily on these carbon capturing technologies while expanding production. No, we need to be reducing production, and God forbid, if we don't do enough, we will need to probably use everything we have at our disposal. We cannot pick and choose what to do. There is one thing clear: we should be reducing production towards the full stop, reducing emissions, and we should be holding the corporations themselves responsible to pay for this, because we have been subsidizing them. And I just want to make a side note here. Like I always say, I'm like, I don't understand fossil fuel subsidies. One side, they say fossil fuel is this amazingly profitable venture. If it is so profitable, then why do we subsidize it?
Exactly.
And then if it's not profitable, then why the hell are we continuing with it? Let's move to something profitable. So either way, I don't get it. So
That's great. And this sort of reminded me the last time of somebody pointed to me and said, well, we're going to wait for smart people like this physicist, astrophysicist to give us technological solutions. And I just turned back around and said, no, I'm telling you to stop using fossil fuels and fix your ecosystems. This is unreasonable.
Exactly. So, I think that Trudeau revealed everything when he said in public, no country would leave the fossil fuels in the ground. He was talking about the tar sands. So, he's in the pocket of the industry, and he'll use every crazy excuse to continue to support them and not shut them down. Nobody asked him last night, do you believe the IPCC targets and the severity of what we're doing? If you do you believe we should leave most of the oil in our known deposits in the ground? Because that's what we have to do. And he won't say that.
No, and I think there was a new scientific paper just published in Nature saying that for Canada, we need to be leaving 80% of our reserves in the ground if we have any hope of hitting 1.5. And, I also say, if you're trying to hit net zero, this is the other issue I have with all these net zero plans, while increasing TMX, or, even here Jagmeet Singh saying he's not going to cancel it. Even if we hit net zero within Canadian borders, that TMX pipeline will be exporting almost the same amount of our emissions to other countries. Do they not realize, I'm pretty sure they're smart enough to know that climate change is global, right? So even if we hit net zero and we're exporting all our emissions to another place, we're still hitting heat domes. We're still getting wildfires. So I don't get it. I just don't get it. It's like, do they not get the math? Do they not do the math? I'm pretty sure they're not that dumb. I don't understand then what's happening, other than they only care about profits and corporations. The people in office right now do not care about the people and planet.
This is coming from somebody who understands the problems with offsets, which is usually the excuse that's used. Speaking of economy, the next question is about the effectiveness of the carbon tax. Does this tax make a significant enough difference to justify it? Is the tax fair to Canadian businesses competing with imported goods? Can carbon tax be applied on imported goods, and how would this work?
To me, the carbon tax is simply a tool. It's not the solution. Our government seems to put all of its hope on the carbon tax as the controlling mechanism. No, I mean, the economic system, we're all worried. Global economics is the driving force that is destroying the planet. I just think that the major problem is that we've globalized a model of economics that is based on the creed of cancer cells, that is growth is built in as a requisite part of well-being of the economy. This is crazy. We live in a finite world. Carl Sagan said, if you shrink the world to the size of a basketball, the biosphere, the air, water, and land where all life exists, would be thinner than a layer of saran wrap. You can't grow that layer of saran wrap anymore, and we've filled it up. And so the whole idea that we're going to find a tool to continue to use an economic system that is itself responsible for destroying the planet. I mean, it's something that can curb the really destructive aspect, but it is not the final solution. It's just a tool.
I totally agree with you. And if you look at Shell and Exxon and the big oil, I think there was a new leaked video and reports that came that they have now started to support carbon tax, because then they say that the discussion moves to carbon tax, and then no real action gets done. And even if you're looking at economics and economic systems, the first problem of all economic models, of any model, not economic models, any model is there are assumptions for the model. And those assumptions are not based in reality. So when you're saying this should be done based on these assumptions that don't reflect real life, your model essentially isn't going to work. And like you said, we are trying to have infinite growth, infinite GDP growth in a finite planet. And we need to move away from GDP and pure consumption. And that is one of those issues. The other thing is, if a carbon tax is to impact actual behavior, it is not happening at a 50 or 100 tons. That has to be very, very, very high. And it has to be in a purely free market situation where in reality, pure free markets do not exist. So the whole, the resulting capitalism and based off this, the economic models is based on theories and assumptions that are not real. So when everybody says, oh, the economic model said this and that, which, the liberals have been touting their, Mark Jacquard and Weaver. And my question is, they have ignored the very first thing we talk in economics is externalities. Externalities are things you don't account for, but everybody else pays for. Hello, pollution and climate change is an externality of fossil fuel use. That is not in that model. The other thing they haven't included in that model, what is the price to human life? What is the price to full island nations going under? What is the price of a full town burning? How do you price that? They aren't priced in that model. So sure, the liberal plan is economic and achievable. It's achievable because it's not good enough. And it's economic because they haven't priced the real cost of inaction. So that is why, when you keep going to capitalist, patriarchal economists who ignore the people and planet and externalities, that is what you will get. And personally, I am not willing to let a lot of people be left behind like the liberals are planning to do if they go ahead with their plan.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave for 10 minutes to feed my wife who's sick right now. But I did want to make a statement before I leave. And that is just to tell you this story that 5 years ago, I got a call from the CEO of one of the largest companies in the tar sands. Could I talk to you? I said, of course. I'm not into fighting. Come and talk. So the next day, he came to my office, flew down from Fort McMurray. I said, thank you for coming. I'm honored, blah, blah, blah. I said, but before you come into my office, I want you to do me a favor. Leave your identity as the CEO of this oil company outside. Meet me as a human being. Mm-hmm. I want to find out, what do we agree on? What's the point? If we don't agree on some fundamentals, then what's the point of talking about pipelines and carbon taxes and all this other stuff? So he was a good man. He was shocked, but to his credit, he came in. I said, look, I know this isn't what you expected. What I'm saying is we live in a world that is shaped and constrained by laws of nature. And we have to live within those laws. I said, physics tells you you can build a rocket that will travel faster than the speed of light. The law of gravity says if I trip on the floor, I'm going to hit my head. The first and second law of thermodynamics tell you you can't build a perpetual motion machine. Those are laws of nature that physicists find. Chemistry is the same. The atomic property of the elements determines melting point, freezing point, boiling point, all of the properties, reaction rates, diffusion constants, all of that is determined by laws of nature. And biology, it's the same. Every species has a maximum number that can be reached. And if you go beyond that, your population will fall. That number is set by what's called the carrying capacity of an ecosystem. We don't live within an ecosystem or habitat. We live within the biosphere. And every scientist I know says we're already past the carrying capacity of the biosphere indefinitely. Like we're way past that. We're living by using up what should be available for our children and grandchildren, all to keep this economy going. And then I said, Mr. CEO, what do you think is the most important thing every human being in the world needs? Now, any child could give you the answer, but instead he went, well, and I could see he's thinking job, money. I said, if you don't have air for 3 minutes, you're dead. If you have to breathe polluted air, you're sick. So would you agree with me that clean air is a sacred gift from nature, and we have a responsibility to ensure that it continues to be as as clean and pure as when we get it. And I said, you and I, we're 60 to 70% water by weight, but our bodies leak water. I said, if you don't have water for 4 to 6 days, you're dead. If you have to drink contaminated water, you're sick. So clean water is like pure air. It's a sacred gift, and we've got a responsibility. And then food is a bit different. We can last 4 to 6 weeks without food, but eventually you'll die. Most of it comes from the soil. So clean soil and food should be like clean air and clean water. And finally, I said, every bit of the energy in your body and mind that we need to move and grow and do work and reproduce is sunlight captured by plants in photosynthesis. So photosynthesis in the oceans and on land. And then the miracle of these 4 things that indigenous people call earth, air, fire, and water, they are cleansed, replenished, delivered to us by the web of life, that nature is the source of those things. Other things, the economy, corporations, the market, currency, these are not forces of nature. We invented them. You can't change the laws of nature, but anything we create, our political system, our legal system, our economic, we can change that. And we have to change it. I said, Mr. CEO, if you will shake hands with me and agree, I will do everything I can to help you and your company. He couldn't do it. If he were to go back to his shareholders and say, well, I had a discussion with Suzuki and he's right, whatever our company does, we can't affect the air, water, or soil. He'd be fired in a flash because that's not his job. So it's the game he's playing, the rules, as Devyani just said, the rules render externalities the very things that keep us alive. So the system, the economic system, is at the heart of the problem. And when we buy into that game, you're not going to get out of it by just trying to change it here and there. Anyway, I'll be back in about 10 minutes.
Wow. I wish that we could ask every single person who's going to be elected to our construct of a system to listen and agree to that.
I agree.
So in this 10 minutes before we welcome Dr. Suzuki back, there's some questions that are here that are just for you. So I figured I'd ask that, but actually just on to the next one, which is general, but I think is fine for here, which is a question about justice, which is what would a post-colonial society look like in Canada? I'm adding the quotes because, yeah. What do reconciliation outcomes look like? Can this be achieved if we're using terms like Indigenous versus settler, a word that they've heard that you've used before? And how does the Indian Act fit into a model of a just society? I would like to add some commentary that I learned the other day actually about this, which is that some of the legislation that has been very damaging, just known as white paper by the previous Trudeau Prime Minister, was part of a program for a so-called just society. And it involved the assimilation and the continued genocide of Indigenous people. So what do you think?
Yeah, no, and that is a very good question. And I might not have all the answers, but from what I have seen and what I have learned was when I moved to Canada, the way I put it, there's not any way better to say that, we have taken everything from the Indigenous people and we still continue to take what little they have left. And this is colonialism. This is what colonialism did when they came, to India. When, the East India Company came, they were welcomed with open arms for trade. And what happened? They colonized. We were lucky that we kind of got rid of our colonizers. But I think the first few steps is just, like they say, the truth, right? We have to accept and acknowledge the genocide that they have suffered, that the Indigenous people have suffered in Canada and other places, but we're talking of Canada right now. And I think we need to try, I believe in land back. I believe in giving nations their sovereignty over their lands. They are the ones who have been stewards of these lands for 10,000 years. they've been here before the colonizers came, and they have, as Dr. Suzuki mentioned earlier, been maintaining these systems sustainably for thousands of years. We need to be looking to their systems, and like I said, this new model of economics that we have created in the last few hundred years is not working for society. There are ancient societies, such as the indigenous societies across the world that have lived and prospered. Maybe we should take some ideas from them. We should not be forcing pipelines through their lands. There needs to be an immediate, I would say, implementation of all the calls to justice and action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people. These are things that we can do right away to begin kind of healing that wound and trying to reach across. But, and what I say when it comes to, even if we talk economy, we need to support Indigenous-led utilities to truly start to become part of the prosperity that we have basically created in Canada based on their genocide. And so that's the least we can do, is start including them. How would that happen? I am not an expert on that. Like, I am a climate scientist, but I know there are experts working on this field. And I would say those experts themselves are the nations and the Indigenous people. We need to listen to them. We need to work with them. And, they know, like, we cannot keep prescribing from a more colonial perspective that this is what should be done. It's time to listen to them. It's time to sit with them and ask, what is it that we can do? What is it that you think needs to be done? And that is what needs to be done. And I cannot say what that is because I haven't had the opportunity or the honor to be able to sit down with these nations and ask them. But I think that is the first step, is truly listening and understanding and knowing and asking them, what is it that we can do for you? Because that is the only way we can move forward. Anita, you know a lot more about these issues too, so you can chime in.
I don't know that I know a lot more, but I would just add that I want to talk about the way that the question was phrased a bit, because I think that the idea that we're looking to the end of reconciliation, like there's some outcome that we should be striving for, and once we get there, we're done. We're in this process of acknowledging truths of harm, of genocide, of ongoing genocide. And there's a lot to do. So I don't think it can actually be looked at as like, what's it look like on the other side of this problem? What we can do is strive for everybody, having those things, water, food, the rights that we believe that everybody should have, and dignity and care and community and those things. And we can strive for a beautiful society and one where everyone's cared for. And I think that, it isn't so much of the identity of people, but rather righting past injustices. And that is a process, and something, a piece of legislation too, like the Indian Act, is hugely problematic. But in dismantling such a thing, you can't throw out the treaty promises that the state has, but also at the same time, not like, Canada has ever been good at that. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, just to add to that, I think they also asked, what did I mean by me being a settler and with the Indigenous, is that I am not native Indigenous to this land. And so when I have come from India, if I partake without understanding and trying to mend those, like to make those bridges, then I am just, in other words, recolonizing and becoming part of the system that is colonial, patriarchal, and built on genocide. And I don't want to do that. So I don't have all the answers, but please reach out if you have ideas on how I can not be part of that system and make the situation worse. Because coming from a place where I was colonized, I want to do everything I can to not be that person here.
Can I add something to this? I don't know what the question was, but the issue of the Indigenous people is more than just a question of righting past wrongs. It's that we need them. They've got something that we don't have. And you see, underlying all of our problems today, I believe, is that we have undergone this fundamental shift over the last 1,000 years from what humans have always acknowledged in the past, So 95% of our existence, we were hunter-gatherers. We had to follow where the plants and animals led us through the seasons on their migrations, carrying everything that we owned on our backs. And when you live under those conditions, you know very well that you live within a web. You're a small part of a web of relationships with other animals, with plants, with air, water, soil, sunlight. You understand that. That's what's called an ecocentric way of seeing our world. But we've shifted into this anthropocentric way where we think we're the center of the action. It's all about us. So, you know, nature doesn't have any role in our economy. It's all about our productivity and our cleverness and inventiveness. We, you know, around the world, when you've had this resourcist mentality coming into new areas, whether it's Africa, South America, or wherever, the resourcist attitude is those goddamn indigenous people, they're getting in our way. We want what they got. And what they're saying is the land is sacred. Like these plants and animals, they're our relatives. You've got to treat them with respect. You know, we have to relearn. We have to find that ecocentric way of seeing the world. And I think that indigenous people can show us leadership, but they've been pounded down so long. First of all, they need to have the economic well-being. First, they need the land to practice their culture. So we have all this area we call Crown land. That's not Crown land. That's indigenous land. Give it back. But then we're occupying a hell of a lot every day. You know, we acknowledged we're on indigenous unceded territory. Pay the bloody rent for what we're here. Exactly. Every transaction we carry out on their land, there should be a rental fee that goes to them. Because right now, I can tell you, you can see this at Fairy Creek. Who is the best friends of the indigenous people? They're the logging companies. They're the fisheries industry. They're the mining companies. Oh man, they're best friends. We care about you guys, you know? So it's not surprising when they've been living on crumbs and along comes this buddy that's saying, I'm willing to share some of it, they go for it. So they need to be brought back up to a position of economic strength, to having the land so their culture can be alive, and then they can develop ways of living that we should learn from and follow.
And that is so true. I think like the traditional knowledge, the ecological knowledge, as you said, that they have, why did wildfires are getting out of control? There's one side is climate change. The other is we put the colonial mindset of forest management and took away the indigenous managing of forests, which, you know, fire was a part of the ecosystem, but they were low intensity fires and they came once every about 12 years or so. But we took that away. We said everything, because I think the colonist mindset was nature is bad, it is to be conquered, like you said. And so we conquer trees, we conquer everything. And so if there's fire, we are scared of fire because it's, you know, we stop it and we remove it from the landscape. So we really need to bring back that indigenous knowledge on how to manage these lands. And like you said, why aren't they getting the rent of all of us living on these unceded territories? And then at the same time, why are the logging companies and pipeline companies their best friends? It's because we aren't truly giving them other options to be part of this economic society that we have created that are more sustainable and more in line with their true values. Exactly. We are telling them we're going to build a pipeline through your kitchen and your living room. Now, whether I'll pay you for it or I'll build it anyway, what would you do? That cannot put them in that situation. They have rights over their lands. Like you said, it's not crown land, it's indigenous land. And we need to respect that.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I think that it's returning crown land seems to be the obvious one, but getting to the next part of paying rent, I think is really key. And yet to suggest that, sometimes people get really worried about it. There's some lovely comments that are also coming in about transformative justice and racial justice and climate justice being the same thing. And I wanted to point to one comment there about the climate change really being a colonial concept, because it's only once you've separated yourself from understanding how you exist within nature and an ecosystem do you suddenly think that it's external. So I will ask this question. I will also say that we're about 2 minutes from our official end time. So I want to just see, are we good for staying for another half an hour, or do we want to wind down? And I'll say if we get tired at any point, please feel free to.
I'm sorry, I've taken too much of your time, and I'm taking care of my wife, so I'm going to have to split now. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to mouth off, but it's all to say, please vote for Devyani, please, please.
Thank you. The next question, which I thought might be their ending one, is exactly about that. And it is, we're convinced that climate change is a serious issue, but when I talk to my family and friends that I'll be voting Green, their response is that the vote will be wasted or the Green Party will never win. So how do I convince others to vote Green? And I know that Dr. Suzuki provided a video to Dr. Singh where he talked about his reasons for this, but Dr. Singh.
Oh, I was wondering if you wanted Dr. Suzuki to answer before he left, but I think he left. So
no, I'm here, but I'm leaving now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that.
No, thank you.
Yes, that's a very good question about voting Green. And I've had a few people ask me, I want to vote Green and I want to vote for someone I really believe in, but I feel it'll be a wasted vote because you won't win. So when you look at Quadra, I can speak for Quadra because I've looked at the numbers here. In the last election, the Liberal Party won with only about 22,000 votes. 24,000 people in Quadra didn't vote. So my thing is that a vote isn't wasted because a lot of people have become so, jaded or, just like with politics that they feel that nothing will happen. So why should I even bother? But imagine if those 24,000 people, or even half of them had voted Green, the Greens would have, I think, been up there second or, in Quadra. The other thing is there is no wasted vote. Even if your Green candidate does not win, voting, every vote that goes to your Green candidate sends a message about what your true values are, what your ethics are, and what you want to see in government. And, so that is why I say and especially in Quadra, you don't have to worry about, strategic voting. The Liberals have been winning with a huge margin. You take that margin away from the, above what they got, the Conservatives, put it to the Green, it's the Greens who would win or come second. But I truly think there is no wasted vote. Greens truly do care. With the Greens, I say, look at your candidate. Even if you don't believe in the party or certain other people in the party, as also Dr. Suzuki mentioned earlier, the Greens are not whipped. So it is, you get your candidate. That is who you get as your voice in Parliament. And your candidate is the one who is your voice there speaking for you. So if you believe in that person, I would say vote for that person. And I know we haven't got a Green candidate in every riding, so there are some ridings where you won't be able to, but I truly believe, I bought into that whole strategic vote 10 years ago too, and I realized it was, if you're always voting out of fear, you're only going to get incremental change, and you're never actually going to get the government you want, a government that you believe in, a government that inspires you, a government that works for you. Because when you vote out of fear, that is what you get. You're voting in a government out of fear. And so I truly believe that what we put out in the world comes back. So when we vote out of fear, it's that fear that stays. So I don't know what else I can say to that, but I truly believe you should vote for who you want, because at this point, we're running out of time and really you've got nothing left to lose.
I have some things to add because I know that you're not going to say them about yourself. So I think those are some good general arguments to use in other writings, but I want to talk about electing you. And I think it's really important to talk about every writing specifically and to look at your writing specifically. I mean, personally, no, I don't think a vote is wasted because a vote is your voice. And it can feel like that in our first past the post system for sure. But every riding has its own situation, its own feeling, its own existence. And in this riding in particular, the incumbent Liberal won in the last election with 22,000 votes. And the people who didn't vote who decided that why would I? It's not going to do anything. There were 24,000 registered voters, or eligible voters who decided not to cast a ballot. So anything can happen if people truly take the opportunity for change when it shows up. And it's hard against the cynical existence of our political system, for sure. But what I want to say is that vote locally, but in this riding, in Vancouver Quadra, the chance we have to get Devyani elected is incredible. It is very rare to have somebody as qualified, as heartfelt, as compassionate, as individually capable of creating change as Dr. Singh is. And so to me, and I'm really sad that I don't live in the riding, because then I don't get to go to the ballot box and get this like strong degree of satisfaction to vote with my heart, but not just with my heart, and not just for hope, and not just for the desperate change that no one else will be able to bring about, that will leave us like we really are out of everything, right? The chaos is here and we're fighting for everything we can get at this point, and it's worth it. But that knowing that I could further this, the voice of one individual who would represent so many, and the science that we need to take there, but not just the science, but that social understanding, all the other pieces that go into it. I can't imagine how anyone would go vote for anything else. All right, I'll stop it with the compliments, but we're going to go on for the next 25 minutes for questions. We probably won't make it to everything that people asked in the chat. So I suggest you reach out by email if you'd like to have a discussion or have your questions answered. It is a very short election. But there was a comment here about needing a movement behind you, because we need to change an entire system. So I totally believe that as an individual, you can bring change, but I think it's important to talk about that, this overhaul of our systems that is needed. And I want to ask you, because I feel like there's a movement behind you. Do you feel like there's a movement behind you? And are we building one?
I mean, I've definitely been feeling it. And I didn't think there would be one, but I think you're right. We need to build that movement, and more people are coming on board. But I want that movement to be everyone. It's not like I don't want to be the leader. I am the voice. Okay, I'll represent and take all the nonsense from Parliament, but I feel that the movement needs to be of everybody. And it's like I keep seeing people doing general strike now. Like we need as people, we have to just get up and demand it, because it's the systems we've created. We forget we have to go to our jobs, we have to go earn money, then we are told we have to do this and that, and it takes us away from our true passion and what we really want. And we all want the same thing. We want basic dignity of life. We want a good life. We want to be able to not have to worry about where we're going to get food or water, and so yes, let's build this movement. And definitely in Quadra, but we need to build it nationwide. And I think the more of us that in a way rise up and speak up and start being troublemakers for elected officials, I think we can finally start to see some change. And I definitely want to be that troublemaker sitting in Parliament when people aren't listening or, are voting against the interests of people and planet. So I can guarantee you, I will be having fun making trouble for people who go against people and planet in Parliament.
And I think the movement's growing, and it's there, and it's something that we can unify and we can continue working on after this election is over. So the next question, back to the technical stuff, is what do you think of carbon budgeting policy, where industries and eventually individuals are granted a carbon cap for the year, and which can be monitored on a credit card like arrangement, and where each item for purchase has a greenhouse gas tag linked to it? Good luck on the organizing of that one. And carbon credits can be traded from creditors to debtors. Perhaps it's a last-ditch policy. What do you think?
Okay, so there's a lot in that question. So I'll begin with the carbon budget in general. I think we need to go with a carbon budget rather than we keep saying carbon tax, because we, as a planet, have a carbon budget that we if we want to stay within 1.5 degrees. the problem with that is, though, if we only take it as, if we take it as a carbon budget to 1.5, that's okay. But if we say every year this is all the industries can emit, then we might be exceeding our overall carbon budget, right? So I think in that they said having a cap on industry versus carbon budget. So the two things are different. One is a cap on emissions. As long as those caps are going down every year and we are decreasing it so that it can eventually be wound down, then it fits in within the carbon budget. So think of the carbon budget as being 100, and that we have 100 units until 2050. A cap on emissions could be 10 per year, but that means we only have 10 years. Or it could be, it's 10 per year indefinitely, but then by after 2050, we'll be exceeding the carbon budget. So I don't know, it's like, I think we need to have a cap. We need to ensure that these caps are being reduced so that we are, as we work towards a managed wind down of the fossil fuel industry. When it comes to other industries, I don't think we need to worry as much about a cap, because if a lot of their manufacturing and all is electricity based, then we can just get electricity from cleaner sources. So I don't know. There was a lot in that question that I don't think I quite understand the way it was made. Also then about the credit card and spending, it was a little confusing. So
yeah, so I think there's multiple thoughts in here. One is generally carbon budgeting. I think there's the question here is relating to like personal carbon budgeting and like, and I would say that, you know, in terms of putting this to capping individuals and kind of making us individually responsible for our own carbon budgets, I say that's probably not the most efficient way to go about it.
No, I thought it was for the industry, because as this is a fossil fuel thing they've been doing, other than misinformation, is trying to make us believe that, you know, that we are to blame. Whereas historically, 70% of emissions, 70% of the climate change that's been created has been through fossil fuel industry and other industry. So really, we're only responsible individually for 30% of this. And so when everyone keeps saying, not everyone, it's the fossil fuel industry's campaign, they truly make us believe that we should be looking at our own carbon footprint. We should be all vegan, or we should stop driving cars. We should stop flying. I'm not saying that that isn't important, but if all of us today stop doing everything, that there's still 70% of emissions that would not be accounted for. And so that is why I am more for action and pressure on government and industry versus individual action, because individually, I think we are, most of us who care are doing all we can. We're reducing our consumption, we reuse things, I'm pretty sure we are driving less, we're flying less, we take transit, we bike places. There's only so much we can do. The rest of it has to come through policy, because, we do need to get places. There are people, it's a thing about equity and justice. Now, if the government doesn't force industry to come up with options that are low carbon, transit options or car options like EVs or electric buses, then there's nothing we can do, even if we are vegan today and all of that, that's still going to take care of those emissions. So I feel while we have personal responsibility, I think we're at a place where we really need to push government and industry on their responsibility, because that is really where we are going to see change. And we need to regulate, we need to, through regulations, laws, and other incentives, ensure that we are moving and having that energy shift towards cleaner energy.
Yeah, I think that, there's a couple pieces of it that I've heard you speak about before, like the problems with kind of like offsets, which is a lot to do with the way that people do kind of net budgeting, which raises a lot of red flags. And when you said earlier, like you couldn't believe that these people are they really not doing the math? And then when I was at the UN climate change conference a year and a half ago, I guess that was the terrifying thing that I learned, was that people are relying on, unstable offsets, and the math that they're doing is very scary. It's not grounded in reality.
Offsets are being spoken about, and they are in every damn 2050 net zero plan for countries and companies and big oil. The problem with offsets is, first of all, there's a huge list actually, which we will be publishing soon, but you're really not buying 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent for the 1 ton you're paying for. And frankly, it's probably not even close to half. There's major equity issues, there's major justice issues, there's again indigenous rights infringement issues. The offset market is a mess. And so we cannot just rely on that. We should be reducing our emissions, managing a wind down, doing a just transition, and at the same time, yes, looking to nature-based climate solutions, because remember, we want to be pulling out carbon dioxide from the air as well. But that does not mean we have the license to produce more. We have to be winding down.
And I think in this question, there, in the bit that's about like kind of individual credits and stuff, it's that individual responsibility is a dangerous way to put it on all of us with our carbon footprints, et cetera. But I think beyond that, a lot of the stuff that individually we can change has to do with stuff that's actually still governed by, you know, large scale policy decisions and community empowerment, things like retrofits. Yeah, sure, it's an individual thing, but that's actually something that needs to be a government program.
Yeah, because otherwise where's the justice and equity? Because the houses that need retrofits most are usually the marginalized people, right? And they can't afford it. We need to be doing that as society and government. So you're right, like, you know, a lot of what gets thrown on us is still a government issue.
And I think too, in terms of like greenhouse gas emissions and equivalents kind of generally in terms of individuals, yeah, there are some larger polluting industries like flying and stuff like that, but generally most people are not responsible for the emissions. Like you said, it's 70%, and then of the 30% that is actually people, it's mostly super rich people.
Yeah, I think it's like the top, like I think the top 1 or 2% emit as much as the lowest 50%.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. It's a huge, so even then it's like, so, you know, it's the rich that are playing. So like you said, yeah, so let's take away that from the 30%. So maybe all of us are really only responsible for like 10% or less. And then everything is industry and the rich.
And I think once we get to a point where like we have efficient homes, efficient, like, you know, food that comes from safe places, water that's well kept and stuff like that, I think we'll be good. So the next question is, I think you've heard of this before, the recent news piece. According to analysis by Simon Fraser University's Mark Jacquard, the Liberals have the most effective and affordable plan, followed by the Conservatives, the Greens, and a distant fourth, the NDP. This was touted by Trudeau in the debate, and I just received an email from Joyce Murray answering my request to act as an MP as if this was a climate emergency and citing the report. What do you make of this report, and how can we counter it?
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that earlier. So there are economists and there are many different models. And like I was mentioning earlier, a model is only as good as its assumptions, right? Because a model it's a simulation. So you try to put in all variables as you want any model to reflect real life, but you cannot model human behavior. You cannot model a lot of these things. And the first thing about these markets that people talk about is that humans are rational actors, and we all know how rational we are. So that is the first fallacy in all these models. And so I haven't looked at all the details of this model, but from what I have seen, it takes the sincerity. What it was saying is like, you have a target and can you meet it? So that's first point. Why it gives Liberals the highest marks and Conservatives high as well is because the target is very low. So yes, it's likely achievable, but you know, it is not good enough. According to the IPCC, we should have a minimum of 50% reductions by 2030 globally, but Canada's fair share is 60% reductions. So all the other emissions targets fall short. And then the other thing is, again, it's modeling based, it is using multiple variables that are going into this model that are very sensitive to the smallest changes in how we tweak them. It's putting in things like income changes, and you know, it was like I was trying to look at the basis of this model, but to come up with such a precise number as 7.5% of GDP, that seems way too precise a model, and that really puts up red flags as a person, as a scientist in me anyways. But then again, forget about what the assumptions of the model are. It is not looking at the cost, the true cost, right? It's looking at the cost of achieving the plan, but it's not accounting for the cost if you don't take climate action. So what are those costs? Those are the costs that cost BC and other places around the world to fight our wildfires every year. It's not accounting for those costs. It's not accounting for the cost of public health from all the fire smoke. So I grew up in India. I have asthma because I grew up in a lot of pollution. What happens here during wildfire is way worse than the pollution I grew up in. There is going to be increased, respiratory diseases and other such. So what is the cost to public health? That is missing from the model. What other stuff is missing is how much is it going to cost homeowners in insurance and other things when their houses are burning due to wildfires, when their houses are going under due to floods. So, and this is just within our own borders. When we start talking about the cost of full nations going underwater, like island nations, this model to me is not, it's again having a very colonial, capitalistic, narrow view of society and of achieving plans, because it's really not looking into the true cost to society, the true cost to humanity, and the true cost to actually the economy, which will come from wildfires, which will come from public health spending. So when it says it's effective and it will achieve the targets, if you're not accounting for the actual cost, they're not balancing it. It's saying it's there's the cost and benefits. It's showing the benefits, but it's actually not weighing it with the correct cost. And that to me is wrong, because again, it is only accounting for money and how much money can be made, and can that infinite economic growth continue on a finite planet? And it's not really accounting for the people and what are the impacts on planet. And sadly, we haven't been able to value biodiversity. We haven't been able to value clean air. We haven't been able to put a value to clean water. And that is why these economic models show any action that you take to protect those things as a huge cost. But if we were actually able to put true values of ecosystem services, it would actually, in the cost-benefit analysis, be beneficial to take action. And that's what I'm saying as a climate scientist. The cost of inaction is more than the cost of action. But that is what is being ignored by Jakarta and other models here.
Yeah, that was a great climate scientist and economist answer. And I would like to add to it that this also relates to the conversation about budgeting and offsets and how their plan works anyway, because when you're doing something like Trans Mountain, all that other stuff you mentioned about that comes into play. All of the other, the ways that they're trying to say they're going to meet the target also come into play. And I think that achievability too relies on the willingness to allow people to suffer in our society. It has nothing to do with justice. And I will point to the rebuttals too, if people want to read more about it. Like it is the choice to do that. And the choice is to leave people behind. So we have about 10 minutes. There's just two more questions I'd like to get to. And this next one is, how do you plan to rally support of other MPs and parties to pass legislation? It's great the Green Party doesn't whip votes, but while the rest of the parties do, how can you bring forward the many essential changes will work?
And I won't say it's going to be easy, and I'm not going to say that I'll be able to do it on everything that I want to see done. But once in Parliament, we have to work across party lines. Climate change is not a Green Party or an NDP or a Liberal or a Conservative issue. It's an existential threat, and it's a everybody issue. It's a global issue. And I truly hope that I am able to have these conversations with other MPs and maybe inspire them to, take that stand. Because if enough MPs, elected MPs of NDP or Liberals, are willing to stand up for what they truly believe in, this vote whipping might change. But, at the same time, I have seen that Elizabeth May has been very successful in getting amendments to certain bills that have come in. And that is one person who's been sitting there, speaking up, creating trouble in Parliament. And so imagine if there were more Green MPs, that would mean that much more change can be enacted. And, sometimes just being there, showing up and being loud and creating trouble helps you get noticed. It starts those conversations. It might take time, but the more you keep saying it, the more like they say, if you say something enough, it becomes normal. And, if you get enough climate champions that you believe in into parliament and they say it enough, I'm hoping that conversation starts to become normal. And that is when the change starts to happen. And I've seen it happen. It's like called the Overton window. I don't know if anyone's yeah. So right now it's far, far right. I don't know what it shows right on the screen, but anyways, to the right. But slowly, when we keep saying this and saying this, we can move that Overton window, and then suddenly, the possibility of change, the area that we can put policies that actually matter, moves. And I think that is where we will see change. And that's going to be my hope, is to continue pushing for it, being vocal, continue being the voice of science, continue being the voice of people, the people who are not represented, being their voice and bringing up these issues again and again, and just basically being trouble.
I want to add to that I think you can always rely on other politicians wanting to look good. And so you can very easily feed them some wonderful things to do. And Elizabeth actually said it recently, which is that people that she knows in the House are very well-intentioned and that they've been misled on a lot of stuff. So when you can actually show people what needs to be done and why, and how to make it work, add some temptation in there, I think they go for it. And as things change and it becomes more obvious that we do have to do it and the public pressure is there, having someone like you to present that to them in a way that they can then look good with will do a lot. And I think that there's a follow-up to this question, and it's, can MPs defy the whip and vote in accordance with their beliefs as opposed to the mandate of the party? How and what consequences if they do?
So, I mean, I haven't been in politics too long. I made my foray into this field in October, but from what I have heard from people who are there, they are scared because I believe the consequences are severe. And I think there's only been a couple who have done so in NDP, all Liberals, and they have been thrown out of the party almost immediately. So people are willing to not, they are scared to vote against because they fear that they will be kicked out of the party. But to me, if I was in a party that was whipped, I would still stand my ground, because if they did that, I figured I could create enough trouble and enough news to show that this is what they do. And, this is what happens when votes are whipped and no action gets taken. And maybe that could help the parties change. I think the problem is that not enough people are well-intentioned, as you said, Amita, but not enough are willing to stand up and do it. Because let's put it this way, it's like half the NDP MPs stood up and said, we really want TMX to be canceled and not go ahead or something. You think they can throw half their MPs out? They can't. They'd have to listen. So I think it's the fact that each one thinks individually, not that we could all band together and stand up, because they're not going to lose like 3 or 4 of the MPs in one go, or the Liberals, right? So I think there is some power to that. And I really hope we have some great climate champions across parties running this time. And, so I really hope they stand up, and I will be there with them, giving them my support in whatever way, as long as they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think that there's absolutely, like, you can never underestimate the power of an organized revolution. And if there are actually enough people in the House that we get enough, climate champions elected in whatever party, it probably will sway the parties. And also, if it doesn't, if you have enough of you together, the timescale of climate chaos is really getting short. So, people worry about re-election or whatever, but if you are actually able to do something like serious, important climate legislation or make a show about it, you probably will get people on board.
And that's the thing, right? Like, people have been thinking the traditional politics has to change with this vote whipping and all of this, because it's only, as Dr. Suzuki mentioned, it's in 4-year cycles. And that's what we have to change, because 4-year cycles is not going to impact the climate emergency. We need to think in 5, 10, 15-year cycles. And so when true climate champions come in, we realize the urgency of this thing. And I'm hoping, like me, the others, we care more about tackling the climate issue rather than re-election. And I think that's when we can see real change.
So right before we do our ending pitch, there's one last thing in here, this question that I couldn't kind of not talk about, which is, so it's asked as this: Joyce Murray will not engage in discussion around the Salish Sea, specifically the southern resident orcas. Biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse are with all 5 species of salmon in decline. What is your response to those who care about the southern residents and the effects on the Salish Sea around Trans Mountain? The southern residents particularly are treated as collateral damage.
I am against the TMX for many reasons, and that being one of them. You know, we have our resident orcas, and, you know, like you said, Joyce Murray will not answer because I wanted to ask her this. I've told you that, you know, how does she reconcile with the fact that she says she brought another tanker ban, but is willing to increase tanker traffic by 3 times in our own backyard, in our precious ecosystem. So TMX, not just emissions and indigenous right, it also will have major impacts on the Salish Sea, because it's not if an oil spill happens, it's when an oil spill happens, because it will happen. It will happen in the pipeline, it will happen with the tanker traffic, and what happens then. So when people say that's, oh, if an oil spill, no, it is when it will happen. And this is why TMX should not go ahead. I mean, many other reasons. This is definitely one of them.
And even without the spills, the tanker traffic is disruptive enough. I mean,
they are starving. They haven't had babies the way they should be having. They've started to starve because because of the noise, they are not able to fish properly. I mean, fish, like hunt for their own food properly. Like, this is not good. And like you said, and increase it 3 times. I want to see little baby orcas around in our seas.
And we're connected to them, right? I mean, with the whole discussion that Dr. Suzuki brought about nature and ecosystems, right? This is what it's that disconnect that we have, watching them suffer and watching them die. It's a part of us. We live here. So I think now it's the time for closing, and I will allow you to remind everybody, and well, thank you everybody, of course, for coming, but of course, campaigns take resources. So would you like to close?
Sure, yes, and thank you for coming. And sorry we went like half an hour over, but if you haven't noticed, I love to talk about climate change and what needs to be done. And I had Dr. Suzuki and Dr. Kuttner with me who have the same passion about this. But yes, I think, you know, please feel free to email me. I know we didn't get through all the questions and comments. I will have a look through them later, but please feel free to email me about any questions you have. You can go to my website and email me through that, or just at devyani.singh@greenparty.ca. You can follow me on Twitter. We are a grassroots campaign. We don't have thousands of dollars in our budget that, you know, help us send out all sorts of promotional materials. So please, if you have time to volunteer, it's just another week of your time, or if you can donate, any way you can help, spread the word, speak to friends. And, you know, don't fall for the rhetoric that's being given by the liberals, which is, you know, if you don't vote for liberals, the conservatives will win, because first of all, they already had another 2 years in power. They didn't have to call an election. And then everything that the liberals say they will do when in power, they could have just done it. They didn't have to call an election. And third is the strategic vote in Quadra, especially. Do not be worried about that. That is just more fear-mongering and, you know, misinformation that is coming from the other side of the campaign. Like I say, I truly am a hopeful person, even though as a climate scientist, I know what we are headed towards and the catastrophe of the climate emergency, but there is still hope. There is still hope that if we don't stop at 1.5, we can stop at 1.6. And that still means a lot more than 3 degrees. So let's start voting out of hope. You know, the time for incremental change, voting out of fear is over. It's time to really get our voice heard in Parliament. And I promise you, I am the voice of everybody in Parliament, not just those who vote for me, but everyone. And I will be the voice of science. So please get out, get all your friends to vote, and spread the word. And hopefully I can have the honor to represent you in Ottawa.